Hello, and welcome to One Book, One Hadassah, a program of Hadassah Magazine and Hadassah's Engagement Division. I'm Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. One Book, One Hadassah provides an opportunity for all us book lovers to get on the same page at the same time. We are honored to showcase the work of female authors contributing to the amazing abundance of Jewish-themed literature. This feels like an especially important mission these days. Today's program with Dr. Mimi Zieman, author of Tap Dancing on Everest, promises to be a most lively one. Mimi has much to share about her adventurous trek on Mount Everest, where amid the risk and danger, she managed to lead a Passover Seder of all things, to her activism for women's health and reproductive rights, and so much more. Before I formally introduce Mimi, a few notes. For those of you who are already Hadassah members and donors, we thank you for your support of Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, which is the largest Jewish women's organization in the United States. The group's mission is to effect change and advocate on such critical issues as ensuring the security of Israel, combating anti-Semitism, lobbying for Holocaust education, and promoting women's health equality, including reproductive rights. And of course, also to support Hadassah's 2 world-class hospitals in Jerusalem, which are playing a critical role in helping to heal injured soldiers and other victims of the Israel-Hamas war, and also through the new Gandel Center to provide rehab to those experiencing both physical and emotional trauma. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and all of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations for both this event and all of Hadassah's work are always welcome and valued. Links for both membership and donations are in the chat box. Lastly, we welcome and encourage audience questions. Please write them in the Q&A. The chat box is reserved for us to disseminate information to you. And now to introduce today's featured One Book, One Hadassah author. Dr. Mimi Zieman is a physician, specifically an OBGYN, a speaker, mother, and women's health advocate. In addition to her most recent work, Tap Dancing on Everest, she is the author of the Post-Row Monologues and Managing Contraception. Tap Dancing on Everest has received multiple awards, including Best Memoir of 2024 by the American Writing Awards and by Pencraft Awards for Literary Excellence. She serves on the boards of the Jewish Women's Archive and the National Council of Jewish Women, Atlanta, who honored her with the Women Who Dare Award. Her writing has appeared in USA Today, Newsweek, Salon, and Ms. Magazine. Her home base is with her husband and dog in Atlanta, far from her New York City roots, where her 3 adult children live. Welcome, Mimi. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a thrill to be with you. Big honor.
We're delighted. We're just delighted. So I want to start in a slightly unusual way, but I want to set the dramatic stage of your adventure, your life, by asking you to read an excerpt from the very beginning of your book.
Thank you. It's called At Risk, May 1988, Kangshung Glacier, Tibet. We peered into the white snow, white clouds, white nothingness. The east face of Everest, where our route snaked through gullies, crevasses, and overhanging ice pinnacles, rose 2 miles into the Tibetan sky above. Our small team of 6 had 4 climbers, a photographer, and me, a 25-year-old medical student. The climbers were attempting a new route. They were purists, nimble, using no oxygen or Sherpa support. Joe, our photographer, sat on a blue barrel at Advanced Base Camp and searched through our telescope for the dark outlines of 3 climbers missing on the mountain. His eyes, finely tuned to details and shapes, shadows and forms, focused on the white slope. We'd last spotted the climbers days earlier, tiny dots ascending toward the summit, creeping over the edge of our route onto the South Col, the link between Tibet and Nepal, east and south, visible and invisible. We distinguished them by the color of their coats and hats, steadily inching up in the bright sunshine. Now there was no sun, just lackluster white, and our world of waiting felt like groping through darkness, except that everything was flat and stark and still. The tarp of our yellow tent flapped overhead, the wind electric with panic. I stretched out on my belly to Joe's right, propped up on my elbows, and rubbed my dry eyes, willing our friends into view as if desire were a magnet. My teeth chattered and elbows burned from the pebbles dimpling them, so I piled sleeping bags over and under me. Our team's fourth climber, Paul, who'd been forced off the mountain days earlier due to altitude sickness, stood to Joe's left, just outside the tent. The three of us were on our own route, a route of waiting, tethered as if by climbing ropes. The landscape offered nothing. No tracks in the snow, no blasts of light from their headlamps, 2 flashes for safe, 6 for SOS. With no sign of them by dusk, my hopes for their return dwindled. They were in the death zone, an extreme elevation above 26,000 feet, where oxygen is a fraction of that at sea level, where muscles lag with lethargy, where the brain hungers for oxygen and thoughts stall and sink in a slush of gray matter, where the body rapidly decays and eventually stops functioning. No climber had ever survived more than 3 days in the death zone without supplemental oxygen. We were nearing the end of day 6.
Wow. So for anyone who's joining us who hasn't yet read the book and think the title is actually some metaphor, no, in fact, Dr. Mimi Zieman was on Mount Everest, and that's a big central part of her story that we're going to discuss, along with everything else that the book represents and reflects: your life, your Jewish upbringing, your philosophy of life, and your path. So my question is, this trek, which kind of was a pinnacle of many other mountain climbing a lot of other mountain climbing that you did, came 30 years. This book, this memoir, was published 30 years after it actually happened. You were a young 25, I believe, when it happened. So why write it now? What inspired this 30 years later?
Well, I had always wanted to write our story because it was such an extreme adventure. But life got in the way. When I came back from Everest, I had to finish medical school, residency. I got married, had children, a career, and really didn't think the book was still in me. And I just sat down one day, almost 6 years ago, and started writing. And then I let the story go to places I didn't know it was going to go. I didn't know I was going to write about my family, so much of my Jewish identity, none of that. I didn't plan anything. I just sat down and wrote, and then took a lot of writing classes and craft workshops and tried to make it into a book.
It's awesome. An awesome experience and process as well. So I actually debated whether we should delve into your Jewish piece, which I often do first. But I think, again, your experience of reaching so high is so unique that I really want to get into that a little bit to help our audience understand where this all came from. So where did your initial interest in the intense love of the mountains come from?
It was kind of accidental. Also, I grew up in New York City, the daughter of refugees. My father was the only Holocaust survivor of his family. My mother was from Israel. My grandmother had to flee Germany, and maybe you wanted to talk about that later. But I found my way during college to the mountains of Colorado. I randomly saw a poster advertising high altitude field biology in the Rockies, and found a way to get there. And then I was hooked. I instantly fell in love with the mountains. I thought I might even be a field biologist, but I didn't really have the patience for that. And I returned to second summer, though. And it just became part of me. It became, this drive to spend more time in the mountains, which led me to then go to Nepal.
Which was your first experience. That was your first big trek that you did by yourself, right? You just kind of took off, much to the dismay of your mother and other family members, I'm sure. But you just decided to trek in Nepal, which was not so usual in those days, right?
Right. So I was 22 at the time, and I got it in my head that I had to go there. And I was applying to medical school. I was waitressing. I was saving money for this trip. I didn't quite have enough money for a backpack, so I had to borrow one. But I made my way there, and that was really a life-changing experience. To have to navigate that country, figure everything out on my own, carry everything on my back. I mean, there were so many. Hiking has these incredible metaphors, right? But spending that time in the mountains, self-reliance, really matured me, and I came back and started medical school.
And just tell us briefly how you got from there back to Mount Everest, being the only woman on this historic expedition. So tell us how that happened and why this was so unique.
So while I was trekking in Nepal, I was there for a few months, and towards the end, I made it up to Everest Base Camp. And I met some climbers that had come off a failed Everest expedition, specifically Robert Anderson, who was determined immediately to return. And we were hiking together a little bit. And I was about to start medical school. So it made sense to me to say, if you need a doctor next time, call me. Because he had said it would take years and years to get a permit. So I figured I'd be a doctor, no big deal. The thing is, he sent me a letter 1 year later after finishing 1 year of medical school. And then it became a whole thing because I wasn't qualified. I didn't think I could ever do this. I couldn't get time off medical school, but the allure was too great to miss. I needed to kind of make it happen. And that's what happened. I studied wilderness medicine. I got time off and I joined the team. So it happened right when I finished my third year of medical school studies. And the thing about the East Face, the reason he got the permit so quickly is no one else wanted to climb the East Face of Everest. It had only been climbed once before our team.
And why is that? Why is that?
Well, it's very hard to get to. It's very remote. It is in Tibet. There's another much more popular route in Tibet, the north side. This East Face is hard to get to. It's sheer. It's got lots of avalanches, sheer rock and ice. There's a quote that George Mallory said when he saw it in the 1920s. He's a famous Everest explorer. He said, other men, less wise, might attempt this way if they would, but it was emphatically not for us. So before we went, one team had accomplished it, but they did use oxygen. They did have a large team. And Robert's idea was maybe we could find a different route up that a small team could do without oxygen, without Sherpa support. And, nobody really knew if that was possible. And he liked that idea of trying something that you don't know if it can work.
And just as you're describing this, I read it and listened actually as well to your audio version. I'm just thinking, is this like the foolishness of the youth, right? Would you ever attempt such a thing today? Or would you let your children attempt such a thing?
I just had this discussion with a friend because her daughter was about to go solo hiking in the middle of last night and she was worried. I do think there's some foolishness of youth, but I also, I would not be against it. I think we grow when we do things like this. And I think we're capable of a lot more than we think we are. And as I told my friend, she was worried about her daughter, but they live in New York City, which I just came back from. And I'm like, you know what? Stuff happens in New York. There's dangers everywhere. There's risks everywhere. And, we are capable people. So.
Okay. So throughout the book, you really describe in very vivid detail a lot of the crises, medical occurrences. And by the way, we're going to not have a spoiler. We're not going to tell our audience what actually happened to those hikers who you were awaiting with such panic back at the beginning. But I have to say that of all your descriptions, your constant referral of how cold it was, how freezing, the avalanches all around you. I can't stand if the temperature gets below freezing. So I was cringing every time you were talking about that. And I just wondered how you got through such continuous and how many days, I forget exactly how many days you were on the mountain and how you got through that kind of ice cold.
I was gone for 4 months, but it took us a while to get there and to get home. The rest of the time we were in the mountains. I went to school in Montreal. So I had preparation for extreme cold. And I learned that it's almost all about the equipment. But it was still, I mean, you had to be in your sleeping bag when the sun went down. We slept with hot water bottles by our feet. But that was part of the experience. It's not for everyone.
Definitely, I don't think would be for me for a lot of reasons, but maybe mainly no, not mainly, but for one very real reason of the cold. So one of the other things that was very noteworthy, I mean, obviously a lot, but you share very candid descriptions of the human body. You know, even at the beginning, from your own body discomfort and fear of fat as a child to the practical bodily challenges that you experienced as a woman on the trek, right? You were the only woman in this group, which we need to emphasize, and we'll get back to that in many ways. But you had to figure out how to change your tampon or pee when the guys could do it in a bottle, and that wasn't so easy for you. So what made you decide to be so open about these issues when you wrote this memoir?
I felt like it's part of the experience. And if a doctor can't write about it, who can write about it? I'm so used to dealing with bodily functions in my work, which has made my husband's a doctor too. So our family is like that. So it seemed very natural for me to do it because I know that people have curiosities about those things. People wonder, how do they get all their, bodies taken care of? And I feel very much like, I feel like the body is a character in the book almost. My body going through challenges as a young girl. I had full casts on my legs as an infant. I was a heavy child, so there was body shame from that. Then I discovered dance, and I just loved the feeling of my body being strong, but also uniting with my body. I could control my body. My body and mind were one in dance, feeling the rhythm. And that's how I feel hiking, that there's this feeling of oneness with the body, which I think is hard to feel in our everyday lives. Sometimes the body just feels like it's getting in the way and it's all about our heads. And that's, there's a spirituality and a meditation that comes in the book too, because that's another experience when I can feel out of my head, and more oneness. So I felt like it was important to talk about the body. And then, of course, I'm training as a doctor to take care of the bodies of others. And so much of what we went through there on the mountain involved that.
Hmm. So let's switch a little bit to the Jewish piece because I love the way that you incorporate so much of the Jewishness into the story. You talk about being raised in the Orthodox community, your flirtation with actual Orthodox practice as an adolescent, your experience on a kibbutz in Israel, and then of course your spontaneous and improvised seder on Mount Everest. So it's clear that Judaism is central to who you are and to your life. But you kind of alluded already that you didn't actually intend for it to be so central to this memoir. So how did that happen?
I think it's my soul speaking. If you let writing go to where it wants to write, it's a process of discovery. Novelists talk about being plotters and pantsers. Maybe that's come up in your discussions, people who like to outline their books versus see where the characters take them. And I just let the story take me places, and that wanted to come out. And now with the anti-Semitism, I'm so happy that this book has that strong Jewish identity because I think Jewish readers are appreciating that. Here's a young woman grounded in her Judaism, proud of her Jewish identity. I mean, the fact that it came out in all these things it was in my journals, having those Passovers and, my family making it into the page is because they are in me. They're part of me. So I had some writing professors who really wanted to steer me away from all of that, who teach, memoir has to be about a small thing and mostly you and your story. And it is my story, but they are me.
It's so
too.
central to who you are. And a big piece of what is so central that was very apparent is the influence of your mother and your grandmother, who
Yes.
they were the sources of your strength. So how did being the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants and a Holocaust survivor influence your choices in life?
I think in a lot of ways, but for one, they were, new immigrants building their lives, very busy. And we were left to our own devices, like the opposite of helicopter parenting, right? Um, so I sort of got the message that I would have to figure things out on my own, which I think led me to be kind of a seeker, and to try to find my own answers. They were just busy, a lot of the time. And this history to carry for all of us as Jewish people is so heavy. But when you're the actual child of someone who went through this, it's just a lot to process. And I felt like anything that I could do, my worries, like I shouldn't worry them. You know, Dad's been through all
You
this.
decided to just go to Mount Everest, so you don't have to worry them.
Makes sense, right? All those things, being called to the mountains, I really had wanted to be a dancer. That's when I listened to what's in here. I mean, that's how the book came out too. My parents' Judaism is because this was talking. And when this talks, I'm not a match for it. I have to go in that direction. If it's dance, if it's Everest, if it's writing this book with my family and Judaism all woven into it.
Mm. It's interesting that you said that some of the writing teachers tried to persuade you to kind of move against that direction. And of course, we know that Jewish authors and books with Jewish themes these days are having some difficulty getting out there in the world. Have you experienced any particular impact because of that, given the strong Jewish content?
I haven't personally experienced that. Maybe, because I'm not a very well-known author, but I do feel under threat because I do feel like it could happen at any moment. And even people participating in programs like this will all of a sudden end up on a blacklist, review bombed, canceled. So I do feel under threat, but I can't say it's happened to me. Within my reproductive rights work, I have experienced our community here in Atlanta has experienced anti-Semitism from our feminist allies that we've worked with for many years. And, Capitol Hill, there was a hearing this week on, anti-Semitism in healthcare and doctors experiencing. So it's everywhere. I'm grateful for people like Hadassah and you for giving Jewish authors a platform, for the Jewish Book Council for promoting Jewish authors and helping them when they experience anti-Semitism. And, when these things happen, I always end up thinking like, I'm glad my father's not around to experience this, after surviving the Holocaust and his entire family being murdered. So it's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. By the way, Hadassah was one of the groups that was testifying at that hearing, and we actually wrote a big story about anti-Semitism in the healthcare community as well, because it is everywhere, I would say.
Yeah, and certainly in the literary spaces. I mean,
yes, we have devoted a lot of attention to that as well. So let's talk about, your proud Jewish moments. Yeah, I think you had several on the mountains. But tell us about the spontaneous Seder you actually prepared and your experience first, actually, before the Seder on Mount Everest, your first hike in Nepal. You kind of had this Pesach moment. So can you read to us that little section in the book?
Sure. So this is back from when I went trekking alone at 22 in Nepal. This is on the third day of the trek. I was there for a few months. I'll start here. Dropping my backpack in front of the tea house in Bulbulay, I spotted a couple moving on, not stopping where the guidebook advised. I was looking forward to putting my feet up and cracking open a book, but they inspired me to keep going. I hoisted up my pack, threw it on my sweaty back, and followed them. A short while later, they stopped and spread out their sleeping bags. I did the same about 20 yards away, beside a 200-foot waterfall under a crown of bright light from a full moon. A massive tropical tree stood rooted beside the falls, and the moon reminded me that today was the first night of Passover, the holiday commemorating the Jews' escape from enslavement in Egypt and subsequent wandering in the desert. Lying in my sleeping bag, feeling the cold wind on my cheeks and hearing the branches creak, I realized I was wandering like my ancestors, not knowing what each day would bring. I was walking toward freedom as they had, freedom from my shoulds. And at the same time, I was firmly rooted in my origins, like the massive tree beside me. I'll skip a little and just end here. What I'm skipping is a flashback about my time being Orthodox. I missed the peace and comfort that had come from my practice of Orthodoxy, from thinking God was always with me and always cared about me. I wasn't alone. Yet here alone at the waterfall, steeped in these thoughts, I didn't feel lonely. I lay on my back, searching the sky, flooded by brightness, pondering this Passover night full of hope, wonder, and curiosity. This night was indeed different from all other nights, the phrase that anchors the Passover Seder. This night engendered a sense of home and peace, attached to no deity, leaving me rested, tired, and fulfilled in the shadow of the mountains that had been there for millions of years and would continue to stand for millions more.
That's beautiful, really beautiful. It's interesting how, in addition to that experience, throughout your book, you invoke certain Jewish prayers and songs as they struck you during your experiences. And at one point, you mentioned Dayenu, listing random circumstances that landed you on the Everest team in a format that mimics the Passover song, writing that these circumstances, quote, feel like a symphony of the universe playing in the background. Tell us about that feeling.
Yeah, so I guess when you get to my age, or you wonder how the different pivots in your life worked. To me, so many of the circumstances felt so random that brought me to that place, which was an extraordinary opportunity to be on this expedition. You know, randomly spotting the poster to go to Rocky Mountain Biological Lab, falling in love with the mountains, just a whole series of events. And, you think about what's random, what's fate, what's driving all these forces, how much is coming from you and coming from the outside. I do think that being the daughter of immigrants made me see more possibilities in the world and be open to them. Because I think a lot of it is about listening for opportunities and being willing to follow. And I think their life full of risk and new starts made me see that opportunities can be possibilities.
And also taking risks, right? I mean, as a child of immigrants and a survivor, right? They had to reinvent their entire life as they started anew. And so it does feel, on one hand, they seem sometimes more introspective and harder to kind of engage in the world. But yet, when you look at what so many survivors and immigrants have done, it really is, it's amazing, right?
Yeah. Full of risk.
We should note also, and you probably are aware of this, that just last week, I believe, a new children's book was published called Passover on Everest. And apparently Cheryl and Nikki Barth, the first mother-daughter team to summit Mount Everest and complete the 7 summits, they too celebrated Passover on the mountain in 2008. So I don't know whether they knew about you, whether your book was already out by the time, probably not, when they were starting theirs, but it's certainly very interesting, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Right. So in telling your story, you certainly defy the stereotype about Jewish women. And how much was that an influence in terms of wanting to tell this story?
Very much so. There's interest in underrepresented stories, first of all. And I at first was wanting to tell the story of someone in the background of an expedition, because we're so used to the mountaineer stories. But as you see from the opening, I experienced devastation and very difficult things on the mountain too. You don't read so much about the doctor's story, the only woman's story, and then the Jewish person's story. And um, I I did feel like there's so much stereotyping of Jewish women. Um, and yeah, so this kind of goes against that stereotype of, and you know, I did want to show that. And
Mm.
again, now with the world we're living in, I'm happy that's out there.
Mm. So you talk toward the end of the book about finding your voice, and you have certainly found your voice in many ways, but specifically as a prominent advocate for women's healthcare, especially in the field of reproductive rights. It's so important today, and especially for our audience, I know of particular interest. So as an OBGYN, you're certainly not alone in sounding the alarm about what's happening around the country with increasingly restrictive abortion laws. And of course, you live in Atlanta, a state which has some of the most restrictive laws. So you've written several articles on the subject, including one earlier this year in Salon with the gripping headline, Mount Everest was the riskiest place I had practiced medicine until I became an OBGYN in the South. So how and why did you decide to become one of the medical professionals speaking out so strongly?
Well, I'm actually subspecialized in family planning care within the field of OBGYN. So that's contraception and abortion care. And I've been in that field since 1994. So by necessity, our field has been advocates and speaking out, from the beginning. So I came here right after fellowship in San Francisco to Emory School of Medicine to teach and lead their family planning program. And from the beginning, got involved in the community to help be a voice, to speak out if they needed someone to testify at the Georgia legislature against some bills or things like that. That advocacy comes from my father. So he was a survivor, but he became a psychotherapist. He wanted to help other people. A lot of his work brought Jews and Germans together, brought Israelis and Palestinians together. He specialized in group interactions. And he was involved in, Generation After programs. And he was always speaking out, and that really instilled in me the desire to speak out for what I'm passionate about. So that's another one of those things that really comes from here. If I have a certain expertise that I can share, I want to give my perspective and add it to the conversation.
Mm. So I love the title of the show that you wrote, the Post-Row Monologues, a takeoff, of course, on the vagina monologues. So how did that come about, and what kind of reception did it get?
So that came about during a meeting that I was having with National Council of Jewish Women Atlanta. I'm on their board and I chair their reproductive rights advocacy. And right after Dobbs, we were having a meeting saying, how are we going to educate the community about the repercussions of Dobbs? And during that phone call, I got the idea. I said, wait, I got to think, okay, I'm going to write a play, the Post-Row Monologues. And our president she's incredible. She said, okay, well, there's a date. You're going to put it on in 6 weeks. So it was an amazing experience. I did a couple of extra interviews with people in the community, and we got a professional director and professional actors. We put it on at the Temple Synagogue, and 350 people came. And, some of them wanted it to be seen more. So it's had a couple of more showings, including in New York just 1 year ago, where we raised money for pro-rights causes. So that's been a great experience on so many different levels, because it's a different form of creativity. And because, I had wanted to be a Broadway dancer, and here I was in New York working with actors on a show. But what was really powerful about it is it was like the vagina monologue. So it's people telling their stories, and it's everything you've seen in the news since, because it was all predictable. And I did include a Jewish couple in the play to talk about the Jewish approach to abortion. So, it's just been another way to use my voice.
Mm. And I think to reach people in a way that pulls at their heart, but also,
And I think to reach people in a way that pulls at their heart, little different than just reading the news.
Mm. So I want to insert a little note from our sponsor here, since I'm sure most of you know that Hadassah is also a very strong advocate for reproductive choice, lobbying in Congress, before the administration, in governor's offices and state legislatures, as well as in the courts. And before the November election, many Hadassah advocates were involved in efforts to pass state ballot initiatives to protect reproductive rights. And over the last year at the federal level, Hadassah advocates engaged with their members of Congress to support the right to emergency health care for women, including abortion services, stop this possibility of a federal ban on the mailing of abortion medications, and protect the right to contraception as well as the right to IVF. So links to more information about Hadassah's activities in this area can be found in the chat box. So, it's so important, right? So many Jewish women, and women in particular, and men, allies, believe that this is very important work. So in the epilogue, you talk about an experience in your residency where you were in yet another adventure in an operating room in Guam when you asked your surgical colleagues if they were ready as you were about to perform a cesarean section for triplets. So I often still don't feel ready, you write, but I've learned women often underestimate themselves. We can handle more than we think. So how has that realization carried throughout your career, where you continue to take risks?
I think very much. I think, and that's actually the main reason I wrote the book. Okay, that was really driving me. That I often feel a lot of self-doubt and fear. And I do things anyway if I'm driven, like I said, from that soul place. And I think that, if I can do it, everyone can do it. And it's just a matter of reflecting on what's stopping me from doing something. And could I consider doing it? What are the risks of doing it? What are the risks of not doing it? And that's why I wanted to be open about my doubts in the book. I think it's very common.
And risks and change kind of go hand in hand, right? And in fact, you clearly embrace it, both in terms of some of these big adventures you've taken and also in your career path.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've pivoted in my career a lot because I started in academia at Emory, and then I took that same set of skills and created an independent. I became an independent consultant in doing academic things, but on my own. And then, was a chief medical officer for Planned Parenthood Southeast, and then a VP at a startup, and then turned to writing. And yeah, I think it's about curiosity, but you're right, curiosity and being open to change and willing to change. Yeah.
So yeah, clearly some people are and some people aren't. I often joke in some of my meetings with staff and leadership that I once saw a sign outside a church in New England that said, "The only people who welcome change are wet babies." And I think that says it beautifully, right? But there are a few others of us as well, right, who welcome it. So I want to ask you, so all of us bring our experiences to the way we raise our kids, if we have them. But I'm wondering how your particularly adventurous spirit and your background influenced the way you raised your children. Did you raise them as risk takers, for example? And are they? Did you go mountain climbing with them?
We always had hiking vacations. Sometimes we had a bribe with a lot of glida if we were in Israel, but ice cream to get up the mountains, and did a lot of travel with them. And they're they're all very curious and open people. They haven't followed my path specifically, although two are in healthcare.
I would say that's a following of a path, right?
Yes, exactly. So not the path you were asking about, but yes. So,
well, did they read your book, and did they say that they learned anything new about you?
Yes, they did. I felt a little uncomfortable about that because I knew they would see me differently. I've always been mom, and now they would know all this personal stuff. They were great. They loved the book, so supportive. And actually, my middle daughter had never taken a solo trip. She had been nervous about doing that. And when she read the book, it made her start to think about it. And she just did it. She just came back from her first solo trip and she had a great time and she sees herself doing it again. So that made me feel so good.
Interesting. Interesting. So on the other spectrum of your family, you had an especially close relationship with your grandmother, who you called Umama, right? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, and whom you lost when you were quite young. So what would she think of your path in life?
She would love it. She was just a free spirit. Um, my mother would say she didn't have a penny to her name. She was very messy, but she had a lot of fun. That's what she was about. So, yes, I lost her way too young, but I really wanted to capture her in these pages because she had a big influence on me. And she put me in dance. She was a choreographer in the Berlin Opera when Hitler rose to power, and she left Germany in 1933 and went to Palestine, had my mother there, and then came to the US on her own before my parents. So she was a tough lady. And yeah, I loved her very much.
Hmm. So it is interesting that you do talk about your grandmother and your mother, that she left Germany in 1933, and she was in then Mandate Palestine, as was your mother, and they must have experienced the War of Independence, but there's no mention of its impact on either of them. Was that intentional, or did your mother and grandmother not really talk about it so much?
You know, they talked about it and it did impact them very much. There's only so much you could put in the book. Yes, I heard a lot of stories about spending time in bomb shelters, and my mother was sent away to a youth village for a while. Um, they all had really hard lives,
Mm-hmm.
and I did hear about them. And my grandmother divorced when my mother was 4, which is unusual in those days, and took my mother back to Germany on her own. And then my mother divorced my father when I was young. So they were both single mothers, and just very strong women,
Hmm.
very loud, outspoken women.
Those are good role models sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to a couple questions from the audience. We have some good questions, a lot of praise, how much they loved your book, proud of your accomplishments. So here's one question. What was your team's rationale to not take supplemental oxygen? As a doctor now, do you believe it was worth the risk?
Yes, the first person to summit Everest without oxygen was Reinhold Messner in 1978, I believe. So it had been done. It can be done. It's much, much harder. These were very, very elite mountaineers. They all had high altitude experience, and this is the way they wanted to climb. They're just purists. They feel like when you use oxygen, it's like you're climbing a different mountain. Um, and they've some of them have used it on other climbs, but no, I'm not against it. I think if you can do it, you have to be safe. You have to turn around when you know that your body is failing, which they had problems with. But I'm not against climbing without oxygen.
Mm-hmm. Were you drawn to the, oh, we were going to say
No,
something?
I mean, high altitude is a serious, you have to be very educated, very knowledgeable, very experienced. That's all. Yeah.
Right. So someone else asked, were you drawn to the Sherpa Buddhist way of life as many climbers are?
I I was drawn to feeling present in the mountains. I think that's why I loved it so much. And there was Buddhism all around me, which I really loved learning about. I never became practicing, if that's what the question is. Yeah. But I do yoga and I meditate and things. So
Uh-huh, okay. So do you know what your next big adventure is going to be?
I don't really. I don't. I like to wait for things to happen. I'm not a big planner.
So when was the last time, I don't know if you mentioned this already, the last time that you did a serious trek? You haven't been back to Mount Everest, I don't think, but has there been another like really big trek?
Well, my husband and I did a strenuous hike in the Dolomites last year or 2 years ago. Um, and we are going maybe to the fjords to hike this year. So nothing, not the Himalayas, but yeah, we do like to keep returning to the mountains.
Still pretty high, right? I think you alluded to this a little bit, but what was your mother and your father's reaction to the Everest expedition? Were they supportive?
My mother's favorite word was ridiculous, so she thought it was ridiculous. Um, and my father was kind of a remote person. I really don't remember him reacting much. So
Hmm. It's hard to believe he didn't have a reaction, but maybe he just didn't express it with you, right?
maybe, yeah. Um, he didn't seem extra worried. Mom was worried. Yeah.
Hmm. Last question that I'm going to share from the audience is, what was the tap dancing? Where does this headline come from?
So there is a scene in the book. Um, it's on one of our down days at Advanced Base Camp. So that's where we stayed most of the time, which was close to 18,000 feet on the glacier. And what happened during our expedition often was that the climbers would leave to climb, and then a big storm would come in, and then end up back in camp, not accomplishing their goals. And it was very hard to live in this constant state of uncertainty, which was great life lessons to accept that sort of being. But on one of those days, they came back, and then the sun came out, and there was nothing to do. And I went into the tent and put on my tie-dyed tights and tap shoes and got up on a boulder and started dancing from a chorus line. Why not? Right? So it was just a happy scene. It was a joyful scene. The guys got in on the action. They got dressed funny. They started dancing, and we just had a great day. And so that's what the book is named after. And it was so sweet. One of the climbers told me this year, that was the best day of the trip.
And why exactly did you carry the tap shoes? Maybe that's why you needed them in case you were going to have that opportunity.
Maybe that's why.
Are you still in touch with some of the team members that you were with?
Yeah, we're all in touch. We're all in touch, but everyone lives in different countries, continents. And last time we saw each other was for a 25th year reunion in England. And we all went to Wales together and did a little hiking. And that was over 10 years ago.
Hmm. Wow. So last question. Considering the terror you felt those last few days on Everest, have you had any other experiences as frightening since then?
So, what I felt in that opening chapter was more grief and devastation than fear. And I mean, I think we all feel a range of emotions going through life, including fear and grief and devastation. And it's how we react to it that can help us, continue through the rough times. Um, yeah, I mean, if I have another person's life in my hand as a surgeon, that can be a very terrifying situation. As an obstetrician, there are many moments like that. I mean, I haven't been an obstetrician for a long time, but
You could certainly experience it. Yeah.
yeah.
So you also have a fellow traveler on the program with us tonight, who's now 78 years old, who trekked in Nepal at 46 and climbed Kilimanjaro at 51. And she was the only woman also with 17 men, and she receives the same stereotypical comments and the same experiences of the bodily issues that you experience. So she's very grateful to hear your experience, as many of us are. So, Mimi, I really want to thank you so much for sharing with us your really, extraordinary life. You're an inspiration for a lot of people, and the work that you're doing now is just very, very admirable. So I really want to thank you for being with us.
Well, it's a huge honor for me to be here with you and with Hadassah. Trust me, like I'm the one who's so lucky and fortunate. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So just stick with us for a few minutes. I want to tell everyone that I'm hoping that this discussion has motivated our attendees to continue the discussion in your own book groups, whether it's a Hadassah book group or any other book group you belong to. We have an excellent discussion guide to help spur the conversation, and you'll find a link to it in the chat box or on our website, hadassahmagazine.org. And of course, be sure to buy Mimi's book if you haven't already. And if you have, buy more copies for your friends and families. Not only will you and they enjoy this really engaging memoir, you will be supporting another Jewish author, which is something we really support. So before we say goodbye, a few notes about some upcoming events. We're returning to the live stage for the next One Book, One Hadassah. We'll be in person in West Palm Beach, Florida on Sunday, January 26th at 3:30 p.m., where I'll be in conversation with Margalit Fox, author of The Talented Mrs. Mandelbaum, The Rise and Fall of an American Organized Crime Boss, the captivating story of a little-known Jewish woman who reigned as one of New York City's most notorious underworld criminal leaders during the Gilded Age. You see, we really cover the spectrum of interesting Jewish women. If you are attending the Hadassah Assembly meetings in West Palm Beach, there's no need to register. It's part of the program. So just be sure to arrive by early afternoon because our event will launch those meetings. If you're not part of those meetings and you live in the Palm Beach area, please plan to come and be part of the excitement of being together. And for the rest of the country, we will, of course, have a simultaneous live stream on Zoom for you. A link to register for both options is in the chat box and will be in the follow-up email you get tomorrow. Also, please plan to join us on Thursday, February 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, when I will host a discussion on the enduring relevance of Anne Frank with panelists Ruth Franklin, author of the upcoming biography, The Many Lives of Anne Frank, and Professor Doyle Stevick, Executive Director of the Anne Frank Center at the University of South Carolina and Educational Advisor to Anne Frank the Exhibition, which opens in January at the Center for Jewish History in Manhattan and recreates the annex where Anne and her family hid in Amsterdam. Lastly, you can tune into another conversation with Mimi on Monday, February 24th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, when the Hadassah Physicians Council hosts its own book club meeting with her, with perhaps a more detailed focus on some of the medical and healthcare issues that have shaped her career. Links to register for all those programs are in the chat, and again, will be in the follow-up email you get tomorrow. As always, a huge thank you to Leah Finkelstein, our senior and book editor, without whom these One Book, One Hadassah programs would not happen, and to Ariel Kaplan, our digital editor, who produced this program and helped to promote it. Thanks also to our colleagues in the engagement and marketing and communication divisions who are so helpful with the many details required to make these programs a success. And again, a special thank you to you, Mimi, for sharing your extraordinary experiences and special talents with us. Thanks also to all who joined tonight. There will be a recording available that you will get in a follow-up email tomorrow and on Hadassah.org, at Hadassah.org and HadassahMagazine.org, and on our social media. We hope that you return for future One Book and other Hadassah Magazine and Hadassah programming. Meanwhile, we wish you all a warm and bright Hanukkah, and we pray that the hostages will return home soon so that they too may experience the light they so desperately need and deserve. Stay safe and strong and seek new adventures. Goodbye.